Former Disney theme park employees. What some worst things can you tell us about your time there? You have to be in specific height ranges to play the different characters. Because Mickey's height range is so short, he's usually played by a woman. Likewise for Donald, although the most successful and best-known Donald that I knew while I worked, there was a little person. When the princess face characters come backstage, they have to take off their dresses so they don't get dirty while they're on break. So the princesses are usually walking around in a smock and bloomers if you see them back there. There is some serious cognitive dissonance when you walk back and see Snow White in her bloomers on her phone cursing up a storm. People harass the characters super frequently. I was working with Ariel, and cast members will always count down before they take a photo so people have time to get into position. I counted down, and this teen boy decided to try to rip off one of Ariel's shells. I had to open his camera and expose his film, so the photo didn't get developed and passed around. I found out later that I was supposed to take it to the Kodak shop to have the film developed and that one removed. But I'd always heard the rumors about ruining the film, and nobody really trains you on that, so I just went with it. The little a-holes deserved it. Story 2. During the construction of Pandora at Animal Kingdom, a very beloved superintendent passed away on the project of an immediate heart attack, mid-sentence, and while opening the door to the construction trailer, George Burke just died. The project was very affected by this. His knowledge of the work that needed to be done was deep and irreplaceable. His laughter and personality was loved by all 1,400 workers that were there. A couple years after he passed, we were finishing the project and found the perfect way to pay homage to George. They invited his family to the middle of an active construction site to let them view it. George's red hard hat with the black Nordic cross on top was attached to the rockwork in the middle of the flowing river, to the left of the entrance to Flight of Passage, and plastered over. The family, friends, and a few Imagineers were the only people there. Only we can point out where the hard hat is underneath the plaster, theming, and plants. I revisit the spot every time I go back to Pandora. Peace. Story 3. My Sil got the role of Cinderella at Disneyland Paris. She had to practice Cinderella's autograph over and over because although different actresses play her all over the world, the signature of the character has to be identical anywhere it's signed for consistency. Story 4. Disneyland first interview papers include a blank outline of a person to indicate where you have tattoos. It's referenced, if you want to change positions internally, to indicate how said tattoos could be revealed, based on what your new uniform would be. Story 5. Not a Disney employee, but I saw a sort of behind-the-scenes event at Disneyland that was interesting. There's no smoking at Disneyland except in like 1 or 2 designated areas that may not even be there anymore, I'm not sure. Anyhow, I was waiting around the side of one of the attractions near the Space Mountain buildings that was next to a bunch of doors by a service entrance type area with virtually no one around. Guy decides to sneak a cig. He leans on the wall next to the doors, looks around, and lights up a cigarette. Gent got 2 puffs in before the door next to him opened, and a guy in a polo came out. Smoker drops his cigarette and grinds it out with his foot, then follows Disney polo shirt guy into the building and the door closes. Best part, 0.30 seconds later, door swings open, a custodian pops out, sweeps the ground-up cigarette butt into a dustpan in 1 second and backs into the doorway without ever touching the door as it closed in front of him. Whole thing took less than a minute. I have no clue what happened to the guy. Story 6. Disney Cruise Line here. I used to go into the complaint system and read all the guest complaints from previous cruises. The amount of complaints that were because of sheer stupidity on the guest's part is staggering. People seem to think because they're paying lots of money they're allowed to do or say whatever they want, which of course can be unsafe on a ship. This might break the magic, but a lot of Disney princes are gay and also bad at sex. Looking at you, Aladdin Naveen. We also had a foreign crew member caught abusing a child and he was promptly thrown in jail. But you better believe that the media didn't cover it. Story 7. A friend of mine worked at Disney World. According to her, Epcot is the best place to work. When she was at the Magic Kingdom, she said she went home crying all the time because the moms were so mean. She also said that cast members got to do something I think is called magic moments. At her gift shop, she could just give a park goer something for free. She said that was a perk. Story 8. A true story that is dirty, ethically. Before I worked for them, when I was just an annual pass holder, I got overcome by the heat and humidity, almost had a heat stroke, at the bathrooms outside the Epcot entrance. 2 security guards wanted to take me to the park's first aid, but a Disney manager refused. He gets in the park when he buys a ticket. The manager walks away for a minute. Security guards say, "Man, I can't believe this. And what an operation." 30 mines for Reedy Creek Fire Department to show up. I was so sick I didn't even pull out my app until they got there. Security guard number 1 says, "Now can he go to first aid?" Suddenly that manager is all about helping me, and so apologetic. He pushed me in a wheelchair all the way to first aid. "Can I get you some water, sir?" Big damn phonies. Story 9. I worked at WDW 1993 to 1997 in Frontierland and Adventureland Foods. Mostly, I worked the turkey leg wagon in Frontierland. The few months I was assigned to the Sunshine Tree Terrace refreshment stand, there was a huge, fake sunshine tree in the space. It had transparent green plastic leaves and plastic oranges. There were light projectors on the ceiling to make it look like the sun was filtering through the tree. The leaves, and sometimes the oranges, would fall off. They had been installed in 1971, so 23 years later they would just drop. Every time one fell off, I took it home. In 2005, the sunshine tree was removed and destroyed. I have a shoebox full of leaves and 3 oranges, the last surviving pieces of the sunshine tree. Story 10. I worked there for 3 months, 2 years ago with my GF at the time, and anything newsworthy that happens there, usually negative, immediately gets shot down by the official page of Disney. Twitter, Insta, Facebook, etc. They keep everything hush-hush. Lighting struck a bathroom building and there was a small fire, and my GF and I weren't working that day, but we were there enjoying the park for free. BC were cast members, and she records it and posted it on her Twitter. News media pages were commenting and asking her questions like when, how, what's being done, and before she could reply, the Disney page said to disregard the video. BC, it wasn't true, and the video is edited, and the media pages stopped asking after that. She gets called into the office the next day and was super close to losing her job. The reason she didn't was BC of how much seniority she had, but she was basically on probation after that. Disney is ducked. They don't tell people crap. Story 11. I've never worked there, but once, in a professional capacity, I was given a 6 a.m. walking tour of the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. What I was most struck by was the pirate characters up on bridges, or seen in windows or on the attacking ship. None of them have any legs. They're top half only, mounted onto poles. If the boat riders can't see a part of an animatronic character, then it doesn't need to exist. Story 12. I worked in Reservations. They give you a name that is not your own, and you better use it. My name is not Robin Lee, but in Disney Reservations it was. Story 13. Obligatory, not an employee, but from a school band, interestingly enough. I was there for our school's performance, as we were going to march down Main Street in the evening. Before that, though, we got a short, behind-the-scenes look at one part of the park. It wasn't all too interesting, except maybe a few partially out-of-costume employees. While we were being told our path for our march, however, we were told about the color they used to paint the buildings outside of the park. Apparently, they're painted a specific shade of green, specifically made to be uninteresting, nicknamed go-away green. This is just so people who snoop around outside of the main attractions are less likely to go inside buildings they're not supposed to. Pretty neat. Go-away green is not to stop wandering tourists. It's to help certain buildings blend into the background, as to not spoil the magic of the park. Story 14. They issue black t-shirts and black shorts for the costumed characters to wear underneath and sweat in. One day there was an uproar because in the break room there was a sign "No blacks allowed," meaning the undergarments. They started calling them basics after that. Story 15. In Disneyland, in the Peter Pan ride, I was always in awe with the floating stars that you zoom by in the ride. Turns out they are just LEDs on the end of wire hangers, attached to the walls mostly, that are wrapped in electrical tape. Story 16. No idea how different it is now, but the underground tunnels always smell like hot garbage. Literally hot garbage, as the tunnels are used to collect and transport everything that gets thrown away. It's really bad in the summer. There used to be a trailer park in Lake Buena Vista for the foreign workers for Epcot. These people were basically indentured servants for Disney, and they worked them like dogs. But oh boy, did they like to party. The crap that went on there is legendary. My understanding is that the trailer park is long gone, and foreign workers are handled a lot differently now. There used to be an annual event where a large Christian organization rented out the entire park. Every cast member hated this event because these kids just went wild. Substances, alcohol, etc. In Tomorrowland, bushes, fights, jumping off rides, especially the Haunted Mansion. Just you name it, these kids were doing it. Fireworks get boring when you see them every night. There was a very weird culture there, cult-like. Seasonal employees were largely segregated from the full-timers. They used to sell cold cuts by the pound on Mondays in the employee cafeteria. I'd load up and live on that stuff a week at a time. I continued to use the backstage passages and the tunnels long after I quit. Nobody ever challenged me. As long as you met the grooming standards and looked like you knew where you were going, it was easy. I don't recommend trying this unless you are looking for a lifetime ban. There used to be a water park in the artificial lake that was just abandoned. There are a lot of theories, but it most likely was a decision based on the fact that Florida lakes can sometimes have parasites that cause meningitis, like symptoms and often results in death or severe brain damage. The Magic Kingdom Park is actually on the second floor. The land was cleared and the tunnels and offices were constructed, then the park went on top. There's only a small section of the tunnels that actually goes below the actual ground level. There was a pump going constantly to keep it dry. Story 17. Not a Disney employee, but hear me out. I was a bartender at a popular bar that, because of some technicalities, was considered to be a part of the Disney World property. After midnight, most of, if not all, of our regulars were students from the Disney College program. Disney employees are not, under any circumstances, allowed to leave Disney in their costumes. Enter us, a brilliant loophole for young employees who want to grab a drink after work before retiring to their Disney apartments. Have you ever seen a drunk Winnie the Pooh fall down a flight of stairs? I have. The craziest thing I remember happening was when Lilo decided to toss a drink on an Epcot Germany employee who knew that she would most likely get fired for having alcohol stains on her lederhosen. I miss that place. Story 18. Former amusement park employee in SoCal. In the 80s, we had fantasy characters in full body suits, like Disney, and they would walk around and take pictures, shake hands with the guests. Well, the gangbangers loved this amusement park and were always starting trouble. One of our characters in costume was set on fire and had to jump into a park water feature to extinguish the flames. After that incident, they were assigned security chaperones for safety. Story 19. Okay, let's give this a whirl. This is all related to Walt Disney World, and I worked there about a decade ago, so I'm not sure if it's still accurate. I never participated in many shenanigans other than calling in sick and then sneaking into the parks, but I had a lot of friends and heard a lot of stories. There is a pretty secluded and often unused place backstage at Space Mountain where cast members could sneak off to have sex. It's not very convenient, nor is it very clean, but that never really stopped people. All in all, young cast members were very horny, especially with the constant flow of college-age temporary hires at the time. The general rule of thumb when I worked there was that male cast members were gay until proven straight, because there was quite a large population of gay males down there. Great if you're gay, but it also meant that if you were a straight dude, as long as you weren't totally creepy, your odds of finding a pretty attractive girl were quite high because many girls were there looking for their Prince Charming. Drinking culture was huge with the college program kids, and at the time I was there seems to have been a whole mini-industry built around taking the CPS on party buses to foam parties and drinking cruises. Although partying was big with the CPS, it seemed to be massive with the international hires who worked at Epcot, like competitive binge drinking between the countries. I was in a sorority in college, and frat dudes had nothing on these people. This one is dark, but there was a co-cast member of mine who was charged with soliciting a girl a few years after I left. I made the mistake of reading how the sting went down, and what he was doing was chilling. I always felt strange around him, but this was worse than what I would have imagined. Definitely awful to think about him working in such a kid-centric environment. Something that also isn't very fun, but everyone should be aware of, is just how exploited the cast members are down there. So many people get into the work down there because they want to make magic for people and have hopes of moving up the ranks. But they most always get stuck in poorly paid, dead-end jobs. Fortunately, many people I worked with have moved on and out of the area. One or two have stuck around and moved up substantially in the company. Then there are those who are still just there, sometimes still loving their job, sometimes hating it, and sometimes just so caught up in their own Peter Pan syndrome. One last soapbox moment. Be kind to the cast members. The rules they are enforcing aren't their own. Quite frankly, most of them would be glad to bend rules or do favors for those who are genuinely kind and don't feel entitled. Although they won't bend rules that are set for safety reasons, whether or not they can bend rules often comes down to a few things. If they have the power in the first place, who is managing, supervising that day? Whether or not they just did a favor for someone else, luck of timing, and your attitude. And don't beg, don't hit on them, just be polite. And never touch a cast member without their consent. On a lighter note, about a decade ago, there was an alligator who would show up in the moat backstage at Space Mountain where cast members take their breaks. No idea if it's still there, but it was like a little game for cast members to go out and see Fluffy. Story 20. Former cast member from the early 90s. There was a central bank near the Magic Kingdom tunnel entrance where all the park gift shops, restaurants, etc. would deposit the day's cash. Each day, an armored truck would drive into the tunnel to haul away the loot. I can only imagine how much cash they took out there. Story 21. Hello, previous Magic Kingdom cast member here. Once, while I was working, a guest at the Contemporary Resort jumped and take his life away. Magic Kingdom shut transport down for a little bit to get things cleaned up. This occurred at night, so the only reason it was reported is because guests on the monorail and in one of the Contemporary's restaurants saw somebody jump from the roof. There was also quite a few times that guests would try to jump off of the boat, attempting to take her life away. Luckily, these attempts were not successful. That takes you to Magic Kingdom, and the lagoon would be shut down for the rest of the day after such events. You will never find these stories in the media, and Disney keeps these types of events super hush-hush. Apparently, guests take them lives away within Disney resort grounds is pretty common. Story 22. I used to occasionally work at one of the outdoor carts in front of the castle at Disneyland, There's water in various areas of the park, so we got lots of ducks. And in the springtime, the babies would hatch and walk around with their mothers. People don't always pay attention to where they are going and sometimes step on one of them, usually take them own life. If I was able, I would step away from my cart to escort a family of ducks to safety. Story 23. Disney are very strict on their company policies. I don't care how much you want to have a Bible verse stamped into a leather bracelet with Mickey Mouse's face on it. I won't do it, Karen. And no waving a dollar bill in my face screaming, "In God we trust," isn't going to change the fact that Disney refuses to associate itself with its merchandising with any religious, political, or alternate branding statements without it coming directly from Disney-endorsed and designed merch. Anyway, now that I've got that out of the way, a few other fun facts. The Hollywood Tower of Terror is so cramped in terms of its space that the break room is actually tucked away in a tiny part of the tower, and the dodgy elevator ride to get up to that is freakier than the ride itself. Every single item of clothing is barcoded like a library book that you check out from costuming, except some items that you have to sign out manually. This includes small brooches or badges, including the heavy metal shield badge for the Marvel superhero store. I assume people have sold them on eBay before, since if you lose it, they deduct $50+ from your paycheck. Working at a confectionery location in merchandise, sometimes if there's a lot of food being thrown out because of its used-by date, a nice manager, leader, might give those on late-night closing shifts product knowledge. I once took home 10 giant Mickey cookies that are like $7 each, along with several cake pops and brownies for free. I was very popular that day on the bus ride back to DCP housing. The only costumes in the Magic Kingdom that can go anywhere for the sake of not breaking theming are leaders in plain clothes, coordinators, or those in the generic stock costume. So, on stock shifts, you became constantly called up for dealing with errands, like transporting lost, massive wallets filled with cash or phones to guest services, or running around in the tunnels with trays of caramel apples to transport them from one confectionery location to another. What the light doesn't touch, you don't see. Spaceship Earth has whole piles of junk hidden in the center. There's a random barbecue just sat underneath the launch of the Rockin' Roller Coaster. Guests don't do their research. I was once walking to my shift in Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood Studios. Not clocked on yet, so technically should have just ignored the guest because it was such a dumb question. They asked me where the Twister ride was, the one that used to be in Universal Studios and was demolished for the Jimmy Fallon 4 Days movie. Yes, we constantly get asked where Harry Potter is, or where the castle is when it's not in Magic Kingdom, or what time the 3 p.m. parade starts. Vacation brain is definitely real. Story 24. Not the theme parks, but I worked at the Disney store back when they first started popping up at all the malls. They made us sing the Mickey song at the end of every staff meeting, and about half of the staff would cry when they sang it, because they just loved Disney so much. They would send you home if you didn't have the Disney spirit, if you were in a visibly bad mood or unhappy. If you got sent home for this more than 3 times, they would fire you. This was back when the female employees wore what was basically a 50s-style cheerleader costume, and we were constantly harassed. We were not allowed to be rude or dismissive when being harassed unless someone aggressively groped us. It was a super weird job. Story 25. When someone pukes on a ride, it's referred to as a protein spill, so that it doesn't sound as gross. Mickey can only be out for an appearance at one location at a time across all parks around the world. Once, Mickey fell during a performance and was seriously injured. Every Mickey in all parks were pulled from making appearances for a few days, and when they re-emerged, they all wore a Band-Aid for a few weeks. Story 26. Third-hand story here. My brother told me that the costume characters, i.e. Mikey Mouse, could be sued if they took off their costume heads in any circumstance, including if they fell into the fake lake because that would destroy the magic of Disneyland. He also said that there is a massive network of tunnels underneath the entire park. Story 27. Worked on the cruise ships for a year. Disney is super ducked up. A crew member died from an unknown illness a few years back, and after a year or so, the body still hasn't been returned to the family, despite their protests, and Disney were refusing to return it for a reason I can't quite remember. It was something along the lines of not wanting an investigation on the body, so they wouldn't get in trouble. Story 28. Not a former employee, but I remember hearing about the Disney College program. Basically, college kids work at the theme parks for an hourly wage, like approximately $11 an hour. The interesting thing is the college program offers housing, which costs like $110, $200 a week. And there's $400 admin fee when you first start. And you have to pay this fee every time you extend your contract. And they try to keep the workers on campus and in the Disney properties, spending money. The whole thing ends up sounding like a revolving door of cash where the college students work and get paid, but most of the money stays inside of Disney. Disney is pretty upfront with these various fees, and any program with a bunch of other college kids is probably a blast, but it doesn't seem to be the best way to actually make and save money. Story 29. This is not a secret, more just an observation of the culture. It really kind of makes me sick and disappointed with humanity. As a cast member at Disney World in 1979, I learned quickly that putting people in uniforms brings out the worst in the instinct to other people. Certain cast members in specific uniforms were very high in status, and other cast members were very low. Since you wore your uniform all the time, your status was immediately spotted, and people tended to treat you better or worse based on your status. So here's the pecking order that I observed. Many cast members told me of this pecking order. Low status to high, the street sweepers who emptied the trash cans, the folks in the yellow jumpsuits who sold the popcorn, the folks in turn-of-the-century garb who worked in the stores of Main Street, the retail workers in the other lands with costumes that matched the themes, the ride operators whose costumes were themed to match the land, such as Tomorrowland, Frontierland, etc., the ride operators of Space Mountain, who were near the top of all the ride operators, the monorail operators. They were the absolute pinnacle of ride operators who did not have some kind of performing role, the ride operators of the Jungle Cruise. They were close to the status of the people in the entertainment division because they had lines and really had to be entertaining. Anyone in the entertainment division, like the Kids of the Kingdom, the performers, singers, and musicians, and they weren't just a little bit above everyone else, they were stratospherically above everyone else. The tour guides, all females, in the English riding, horse outfits with jodhpurs, complete with a riding crop and a fetching little cap on their heads. These girls basically were the top employees who wore uniforms. They met all the VIPs, including Hollywood stars, politicians, billionaires, etc. They could get to the front of any line. They were unstoppable, and they certainly acted like they knew it. Now, everyone I tell this to always asks, weren't the characters the most important people and have the highest status? Sadly, and this is really where it gets sick, they were kind of treated like freaks. All the Goofies had to be really tall, thin men. All the Mickeys and Minnies had to be either short women or little people. They worked very odd shifts, a half an hour on a half an hour off, and they always had people around them to help, which also made them seem weird. So, all in all, my summer at Walt Disney World demonstrated to me the power of clothing and establishing a hierarchy of status. It is a sad commentary on humanity, but a fact nonetheless. Story 30. In 2016, Uwainashe Waini Mesfin, a janitor at Disneyland Resort, Anaheim, died alone in her car, which she had been living in for 7 years. Even though she worked full-time, she wasn't paid enough to be able to afford rent. Her death was part of a larger conversation around how disgustingly low Disney pays its workers. I'm Eritrean, and I remember reading her story, and it broke my heart. She was 61, an immigrant and a domestic worker, just like my mom and so many of the women who raised me. It's so damn infuriating that a company as huge and unbelievably wealthy as Disney still chooses to exploit their workers, SP their most vulnerable workers. How can you justify someone working 40 hours a week and they're still unable to afford housing? Damn evil. Story 31. Obligatory not me, but I went to college with a woman who played Snow White. She said she wanted to quit on her very first day because she had so many screaming, vomiting, angry, hungry, drooling children handed to her for photos. She said it was the absolute worst. I'm not sure how long she stuck it out for, but I know it wasn't long. Story 32. NPR had an interview with Walt Disney's niece. The gist of it is that Walt Disney respected his workers, paid them well, and made sure they were always treated right. After he died, the corporate suits that took over made it hell on earth for the employees. Story 33. I don't work for the resort currently, but I'm not blowing my chances at going back, so I worked in table service at Disneyland, so the sit-down restaurants. It turns out, restaurants are nasty, even at Disneyland. There was a story from Café Orleans that happened at some point in the last 5-10 years that was a very popular tale around the department. I heard it from someone who worked at that restaurant at the time, so I believe all these details are true. Like I said, restaurants are gross. New Orleans square restaurants especially so. So once upon a time, a lady is eating her salad only to find a little baby mouse in it. Obviously, chaos ensues. Managers and executives come down to deal with it and try and keep the family quiet. I think they essentially had their entire trip paid for to try and avoid news breaking. After this happened, they set rat traps around the restaurant because they didn't know if it came from the lettuce supplier or the restaurant. A couple of weeks goes by. A guest finds a maggot in their salad. Similar chaos ensues. But after that chaos, someone in the kitchen sees a maggot fall from the ceiling, so they know that came from the restaurant. Someone is sent into the ceiling to look at it and discovers a rat trap that got forgotten. I'll let you guys imagine what was in the trap. While the cast member was in there, they apparently touched a live wire and were electrocuted in the ceiling. They had to evacuate the kitchen and restaurant so paramedics could help get him out of the ceiling. Bugs and maggots and things getting in food isn't uncommon for the parks. But this story is so popular because it's so damn out there, and most people know someone who knows someone who was there for it. Story 34. This was years ago at DL, but there used to be a show of Tinkerbell flying through the sky before fireworks started in the summer. They would put the spotlight on her as she went down a zip line and go to black just as she crossed to a backstage area. The novelty of it was that there was no sophisticated mechanism to stop her. There were literally a couple of guys in a tower at the end of the zip line holding a mattress that she would crash into to stop. Nightly, CMS would gather at the base of the tower backstage just to see this happen. As soon as she crashed, everyone would go back to their locations. Story 35. Worked at Disneyland for almost 5 years. I personally haven't gone to see the Disney doctor for cast members, but I know friends who haven't heard the doctor doesn't give a crap about the CMs coming in for injuries. The time I was there, photographers and other departments weren't allowed to drink water from the water fountains because we are on stage. It was a big issue the last year I worked there, and some of the leads were fighting for umbrellas for photographers. It gets really brutal in Cartland, where it's 5x hotter. Almost passed out from the heat and dehydration. Story 36. My favorite part was getting screamed at every day, but my upper management, and telling me I don't deserve to be here. I was still training and learning when this happened, Lamau. Story 37. Former Disneyland employee here. We see everything in the rides. There are cameras everywhere, and we have night vision. Yes, I saw you cop a feel on your girl when you thought no one was watching. We actually care a lot about the guest experience. If someone drops their ice cream, I can get them a new one free of charge. It's called keeping the magic. In the Indiana Jones ride near the giant snakes after the bridge, there is a large metal slab on the ground. Under that slab is an opening that falls into a large empty space. The opening is in the middle of the space and about 10 feet high. There is no rope, no ladder, and no stairs to reach the opening from inside the space. There are no other ways to get out of that space other than the opening in the ceiling, and there are no lights in the space. You could literally fall in there and be trapped forever in darkness if someone doesn't come and help you out. It is for this and many other reasons that there is a checkout system on the ride. If you enter the ride on foot, you take a card. When you return from the ride, you turn in the card. If any cards are missing, then the ride cannot be turned on, and a search party must go out until that person is found. Story 38. Underneath the Magic Kingdom Disney World, I was using one of the bathroom stalls. I looked up and saw some minor graffiti that said, "I want to have sex with a princess in costume." And underneath it someone wrote, "Did it, although not the same. I had sex with a princess out of costume." Story 39. I was on the TTC resort platform, working the night of the monorail crash. It will be 13 years this July, and I still wake up screaming from time to time. There is no amount of therapy that will or can erase that memory from my mind. Story 40. Former cast member at one of Disney's retail stores, and I don't have any big secret because my time there was very temporary and short. But one of my managers was a demon. One of the meanest ladies I've ever met, and I'm surprised she even liked Disney. She had no consideration for anyone's time and would change my entire schedule and tell me about it at the very last minute. One of my shifts ended at 4 in the morning once, and she comes up to tell me she switched stuff around and expected me back in the store by 11 in the morning. I ended up quitting. Story 41. When people say that it's like being part of a cult, it's 100% true. In any job you have, there is bias. But at Disney, if you mess with the wrong leader, manager, you'll basically be blacklisted from ever working your way up in the company. The amount of abuse I've endured from guests and other cast is asinine, especially regarding pandemic. I worked in my department for 3 years, was denied multiple promotions for never any real reason. I worked 50-plus hour work weeks religiously, covered extra shifts, you name it, but because I made a mistake in my first year, I never got anywhere. If you don't kiss the ass of every manager, eat lunch with them, and cater to their every whim, you stay at the bottom. I got so fed up after my interview for trainer, was supposed to interview in the AM, showed up, got yelled at for showing up, and he told my coordinator to apologize to me. Then rushed me around my area in 15 minutes because he had a meeting, then brought up feedback he'd kept from me for months just for the interview and to deny me trainer. I quit 3 days later. Story 42. The secret tunnels under MK and Epcot. They smelled so bad. It's where all the garbage went to. We had a Subway and another restaurant just for cast members. They would close down cast parking without telling the cast members in appropriate time. Mandatory overtime when needed without double time. I can keep going. Story 43. Not a Disney employee, but I was at an event that I was working with Disney cast members. I went to find a smoking area before the start of it, and someone said, "Go over there with the cast." It was amusing to see all the princesses and princes standing around smoking out of costume. But based on makeup, I could guess who. Story 44. Never worked for Disney, but the employees used to share underwear. Disney didn't want regular underwear to be visible, so they made their own underwear. And instead of giving everyone their own pair, they were traded around until people started noticing stains and getting pubic lice. Each character has their own pair now, but it's still really weird. Story 45. Former World Disney worker. I started as a common employee, then gradually moved into a leadership role. I once rode Space Mountain with the lights on, and it was terrifying. It took me a while to go back on it again. The amount of crap I had to comp out over the years was crazy. Channel your inner Karen, and you'll likely be compensated in some capacity. Story 46. Former college program cast member, stayed at Vistaway, Lay, worked at Magic Kingdom. Magical moments were awesome. If I worked the candy shop, I'd feel horrible kids spending $20 on candy that was probably $5 worth at Walmart, so I would just bag it and send them on their way. There were lots of creeps, men and women, working for Disney that specifically knew the majority of college kids were there for 6 months. So let's take my shot. Take them out to parties, get them drunk, and they're gone in a few months if crap went bad. Disney was great at keeping everything under wraps, for sure. If you were under 21 and busted drinking staying at the Disney apartments, you had 24 hours to pack up and leave. They didn't let that fly, and you'd lose any college credit you were getting there. I still keep in touch with my roommates, though. Best 4 months of my life, to be honest. 3,207 boys. Story 47, not a theme park story, but Disney store. I went through several rounds of interviews for store manager. Got to the end, and they told me I could have the position, but my beard had to go. No beards allowed because only villains have beards. I listed several non-villain bearded Disney characters, Genie, Sultan, Merlin, Zeus, 6/7 dwarves. But that doesn't change the policy, of course. I just wanted them to know their reasoning was dumb even within the world of Disney. I took it as a sign that I would be miserable at Disney and turned it down. Story 48. Had a cousin who worked there in the early 2000s. She got company housing, rent for Haosong was something like double market value, and rent was automatically deducted from pay. She didn't have to live on company property, but rent would been taken from her regardless. She also had a brain tumor and a note from her neurologist saying she could only work a certain number of hours per week, and her manager pretty much just ignored that. Story 49. I was in entertainment in the 70s and in the inaugural Main Street Electrical Parade. I was the lead canopy carrier in the Snow White unit. The unit right in front of us was a mounted, horseback unit, so we had a trio of janitors right in front of us as we had 20 or so dancers under the canopy, and dancing through horse pies kind of ruined the ambiance. The sweepers had quite a routine of their own to capture any deposits in a variety of choreographed maneuvers that always elicited lots of applause and laughter from the guests. Working for Disney remains one of my favorite parts of my employment history, and one I remember with great fondness. Story 50. Had to maintain the Disney look, no facial hair with exception of groomed mustache. Picture Walt Disney. Clean-looking haircut that couldn't hang over the ears or neck. Male. Before I started a shift, I was given a razor and asked to shave because of stubble, 5 o'clock shadow. This was 2007 to 2010-ish, lifeguard at resort pools. Story 51. I worked at Kilimanjaro Safaris in Animal Kingdom. A little secret. We got paid $1 more than all other attractions because we not only spiel, but drive 35-plus guests in a truck on an uncontrolled trail. If we wanted to, we could have driven right out into the river where the crocs are and told you all to run. Hence the extra $1 an hour to keep us from doing something so crazy. Story 52. Went to college with a guy who ended up at Disney Japan playing a myriad of characters we don't see here often. But he mostly did the parade and shows because he didn't speak Japanese. However, he was in every promo photo they used because he looked exactly like the characters he played. Legit is one of the coolest people I know. He spent months trying to perfect some Japanese phrases the characters said and coming up with coded ways to get a translator escort to help so he could do meet and greets since they didn't have anyone else to play those roles. And he loves kids. He always would tell guests to watch the dancers in the shows and how hard they worked despite not being front and center. Story 53. Disney will give VIP treatments to wealthy people and celebrities, including being chauffeured from backstage between attractions, surrounded by a circle of cast members. I walked right past Justin Bieber and his family behind the Imagination Pavilion at Epcot without realizing it. Story 54. It is no longer there, but I worked at Pleasure Island in the early 2000s, and the tech crew break room was hidden behind one of the nightclubs out of view of the guests. The amount of guests who would sneak off behind the clubs to duck was too damn high. We would sit on our little covered patio and smoke while enjoying impromptu amateur voyeur adult film. Occasionally we'd have to shoo them away, but I generally just let them finish so as not to penis. Story 55. I had a friend who was a gorgeous redhead in her early 20s. She got cast to play Ariel at Disney World. She returned home after a few months saying that they were pressuring her into getting breast implants. To quote her, quoting her manager, "There is no way Ariel has such small boobs." Story 56. A friend of mine would tell me all kinds of stories working at Disney World. The one that I always found hilarious was about some sort of Christian retreat. He told me that they would preach about abstinence and waiting until they were married to have sex. He would catch people ducking everywhere, in the bushes, on rides, etc. Story 57. I just have to say one thing. People suffering from heat stroke or whatever and need to take their costume off should be able to. Damn that ruining the magic BS. If your kids believe these Disney characters are real, then maybe you just shouldn't lie to your kids. IDK. Story 58. You can usually convince a cast member to bend the rules for you early on a Friday morning. Thursday is Payday, and there is, or at least was when I was there in the late 90s, early 00s. Plenty of trouble to get into Thursday night, so CMS are more likely to be hungover, still drunk, stoned, or a combo early Friday morning. Story 59. Not a World Disney cast member, but I'm married to someone who was. The guest inaccessible parts of the Haunted Mansion are gross. Think asbestos, dust, grease, cobwebs, and all kinds of other crap that has accumulated over literally decades. Every time wifey had to work there, she came home and bolted for the shower. It's disgusting because everything is covered in fire-retardant goop. Story 60. If you worked at the diners or food service places where someone was at a register that you walked past to order/charge your food, you didn't get to drink anything or go to the bathroom for your full 8 to 10 hours shift. That's when I lost all respect for them. Not even 5 minutes to go to the bathroom. Story 61. Senior year of Disney 2005, Disney recruiters came to my school for open interviews for positions in the park, food and beverage, character, etc. They hired me and 29 other people. They would fly us down and we would live in hotels and work whatever division they chose. As the flight grew near, I got letters saying how there is a strict curfew, lights out time, etc., and violation would result in immediate termination. It all sounded pretty strict, so I never showed up for my flight. Story 62. Some of the princesses are not so nice backstage. A lot of them were really lovely, though, super friendly and kind. But a few are pretty giddy and think they're better than everyone because they are princesses. This was 9 or 10 years ago now, though, so the ones who are currently there might be lovely. Story 63. Disneyland has resident cats that live on the property. At night, they hunt rodents, helping control the rodent population. Who's the main mascot of Disneyland? Mickey Mouse? They are literally sanctioning the hunting and killing of Mickey's family. Story 64. Both hands had to be visible in photos. For example, one outstretched and the other on someone's shoulder. The biggest no-no is hands behind backs, not visible due to the possibility of someone saying you grabbed them inappropriately. Story 65. I've had business relationships with said company. I was shocked when we got on a call and talked about how you could be fired for uttering the word Mauschwitz. Former actors at Disney parks. What's the weirdest thing that happened to you while you were in character? Story 1. I dated a girl that played one of the fairies for the Tinkerbell place. Beyond the pretty much daily occurrence of old dads hitting on her, she was 19 at the time, the weirdest thing to happen to her was a woman with a 4-year-old little girl was all excited to get a picture with Tinkerbell, who was busy, so my ex volunteered to do pictures and entertain the little girl while they waited. The woman was a git about that idea, rudely saying she was here to see Tinkerbell and not off-brand fairies. So just shrugging it off, my ex moved on. A bit later, she hears a commotion and Tinkerbell is obviously upset and security shows up. Apparently, this woman was Tinkerbell's biomom and had taken her granddaughter to Disney just to violate the restraining order against her. Disney jail is a real place. Story 2. I was a mouse height performer at Disney World around 2013. Can unfortunately confirm groping happened from time to time, and it was incredibly uncomfortable. We were trained to move away if we could and signal to the character attendants to escort the guest away if it happened. One time, some guy thought it appropriate to pick me up completely off the ground in a bear hug. The head pushed back, and because the inside is connected to us with headgear and a chin strap, my neck bent back with it, and it so hurt. Not a weird story, but one of my most memorable guest experiences was meeting a little blind boy as Mickey in Epcot. I gently guided his hands to the soft ears, then the nose and bow tie, and he was laughing and his smile lit up the whole room. I still get emotional thinking about it. Interactions like that made it all worth it to me at the time. Story 3. I was playing Goofy inside a restaurant and I got swarmed alien style by a horde of 10 kids. Unfortunately, while I was playing around with them, the inner hood below the mask slipped over my eyes and I was completely blinded. We had assistants around whom we could signal for help by flapping our arms, but the kids had made it a game of attaching themselves Tarzan-like to both my arms and to raise them. I would have had to lift 4 kids per arm. Dangerous, even if I'd been strong enough to do that. I found myself blind and completely rooted to the spot, unable to ask for help, and with nobody realizing that I was in trouble. I spent like a solid 15 minutes in that sort of limbo, reflecting on the life decisions that had taken me there until the assistant came over and whispered, "Set is over, dude," and I finally managed to signal something was wrong. Story 4. Not Disney, but mildly funny. In the 90s, my mom used to work for the company that owns Kool-Aid. She was over several commissaries, military-based grocery stores, and I usually did odd work for her like stocking or building displays. A few times, I got to put on the Kool-Aid man costume. It was hard to see anything since the viewports were the eyes, mouth, and they were super dark tinted plastic. I was placed in between two racks of snack cakes and was scared to move, much as I might knock them over. So I stood there for probably a half hour still as a statue while waiting to see people. This small kid, maybe 3 or 4, comes up to me with his mom. His eyes were so big and he was adorably in awe. I saw him and bent down to say hello and scared that poor kid. He bolted directly away from me, screaming in terror. I lumbered after him for about 5 steps, trying to placate him and tell him I was friendly, before realizing I was just making more nightmare fuel for this poor little dude. His mom was laughing so hard she fell on her ass. Story 5. I was pretend gang abused by a crowd of drunk Brazilians while working as the Nassar mascot at Universal Studios. I quit the next day. I'm fine. This was 10 years ago, too. I was in a costume that had limited vision and mobility, so it was not exactly easy to just leave the situation, and I had been separated from my handler at the time. 6. 8 drunk Brazilians hoisted me in the air, prostrated me, and simulated the deed while the rest of the party cheered and laughed. Story 6. Never was an actor, but when I was a kid at Disney World in the 70s, I watched Chip get into a fistfight with a young 20-something guy. The guy's girlfriend wanted him to do a picture with Chip and Dale, but he didn't want to. Chip grabbed him in a headlock, and his girlfriend snapped the photo. When Chip let go, the guy came up swinging. Dale had to jump in and break them up as Chip started swinging back. For a kid of 12, it was awesome. Story 7. Not a cast member, but either Mickey or Minnie cut a very audible fart while posing with my wife and me. It must have been awful inside that Dutch oven of a costume. Story 8. I knew a friend, a guy, who wore Minnie Mouse costume. He told me almost all guys would put their hands around his waist. He wouldn't dare to talk or else they will hear his manly voice and that might piss them off. I feel I need to let people know that it's not okay to grope the Disney characters. My friend had introduced me to the people who play them, and they are just normal people. All I can tell you is that they will make a disgusting face under the mask and talk crap about you later after work. Story 9. I used to be Tinkerbell? The understudy, I couldn't do it full time. Weirdest thing is the dads low-key hitting on you. Kids are kids. They do weird crap, but don't mean it. The adults know they're being weird, but for some reason just don't care. Like, don't talk about my looks in front of your kids or try to cop a feel. It's cringe. It happened so often that we had guards, watchers all over the place just in case someone got handsy and it happened too many times to count. Story 10. I used to work at a different amusement park that featured similar costumed characters. The worst thing I ever heard was the time one of the characters was overcome by heat in 95-degree weather and vomited inside the suit, splattering the inside of the suit's head with their half-digested lunch. They had to walk a long distance back to the dressing rooms, breathing the superheated vomit air the entire way. Story 11. I have one moment that stands out above all the rest. I was waiting for someone to ask me this question. It's the reason I left a good job as a VIP tour guide and moved to the character department. I was working City Hall one day when 2 guests came in with 2 little girls. One was in a wheelchair, and the other one looked like she had just seen death. Both were cut and bruised, and the one in the wheelchair had her arm in a cast. The 2 women were actually nurses from a hospital, and were asking for a refund on the girls' tickets, something we avoided doing at all costs. When I asked why, they told me the story. The 2 girls were with their mom and dad at Epcot, and on the way home, they got into a horrible car accident. The mother had died right in front of them. The father eventually died too, but the 2 girls didn't know that yet. They were from overseas and had no money and no contact information for anyone they knew. But the girls some much-needed money to help get them back home. My heart absolutely sunk. If you had seen these girls, you'd know why. They were truly traumatized. I refunded their tickets and got permission to be their private tour guide for the rest of the day, which they were not expecting. I walked them to the VIP viewing area for the parade, which was as far as I could walk them in the costume we used to wear at City Hall. I had to leave them there while I put on my VIP costume. On the way down, I pulled out every kid joke I could think of. I was a really good tour guide. I helped write part of it, and I knew how to make kids smile. Nothing worked. These girls were too far gone for that. I left them at the bridge to go change, walked backstage, and bawled my eyes out. I just had never seen something so horrible. I was truly affected, and it was a terrible feeling of powerlessness, not being able to fix the situation. When I came back, I brought them to get ice cream, take them on rides and stuff, but they never smiled, not once. The nurses were loving it and were trying to get them into it, but it just wasn't working. We went back to the bridge to watch the parade. It was there that I honestly saw true magic, real magic, not bullcrap. I had called the parade department to let them know what was going on and set up a private meet and greet after the parade. As the parade was coming around Liberty Square, I told the girls that I had called Mickey and told him all about them. I told them that Mickey asked to meet them after the parade. The little girl in the wheelchair smiled. "Really?" she asked. My heart skipped. "Yes, really. He told me to tell you to look out for him in the parade and to follow the float back to City Hall." The other girl smiled. You mean right now? She asked. It had worked. They were talking. Not laughing, but talking. It was the first time I had heard them speak. Every single parade performer came up to them on the bridge and told them to look out for Mickey. Every one of them told them that. When Mickey's float came up, Mickey, who was attached to a pole at the top of the float, managed to turn her body sideways, look down at the girls, and point towards Main Street. That was all it took. The girls were excited now. They had forgotten about death. They were lost in a magical world, and I couldn't believe I was watching it unfold in front of my eyes. We followed that float all the way back to City Hall, singing Mickey Mania the whole way. Back then, City Hall used to have a VIP lounge behind the desk that was for privacy during difficult situations, or to host celebrities. I took them in and showed them the book where all of the autographs were. They were eating it up. The girl who was Mickey that day got down off her float and, without even taking her head off, walked up to me backstage and said, "Let's go." I walked in with Mickey behind me, so I got to see the exact moment the girls met their new friend. They got shy, but Mickey was in control now. Those girls met the real Mickey Mouse that day. Every single parade character stayed dressed to meet those girls. One by one, they'd come in and play a bit, then leave. We were in that lounge for over an hour. Mickey stayed in costume the entire time, which is hard to do after a parade. When Mickey finally said goodbye, I had two excited girls on my hands that couldn't stop smiling. They talked and talked and talked. We had a wonderful day after that, but what I remember most is when we walked by the rose garden. The older one said, "Oh, my mommy loves roses, and she stopped. I held out my hand and walked her to the gate, picked her up and put her on the other side and said, "Pick one." She looked happy as she picked out her favorite rose. She didn't say anything more, and she didn't need to. I said goodbye to the wonderful nurses and the wonderful girls, then walked backstage behind the train station. This time I didn't cry. It felt so good to be a part of that. I realized that as much as I liked helping guests at City Hall, the true magic of Disney was in the character department. I auditioned, transferred, and never looked back. Thanks for letting me relive this. It was a special day for me. Story 12. My ex-wife was in the character department at Disney World years ago. She was always getting injured by guests, from macho men wanting to see how strong of a grip Mickey had, to grabbing hold of Donald's bill and yanking really hard. Pulling noses, beaks, ears, etc. can really hurt people. Another person was dressed as Daisy Duck and got tackled by a guest and knocked out cold. When she recovered, she pressed charges. The worst nights for the characters were high school senior nights and the religious group nights. Bunch of unruly teens with little to no supervision. No one wanted to work those shifts, ever. For those wondering about the religious nights, it was called Night of Joy. Usually had a few religious pop rock groups that gave small concerts while the park was open. The kids' teens were just not properly supervised, and they acted wilder than you would think on this sort of night. Everyone hated working those shifts. Disney canceled Night of Joy in 2018 after 34 years. Most cast members were relieved. Story 13. I had a female friend who played Pluto for a few years. Even though her gender was indistinguishable because it's a fully body Pluto costume, she would regularly share how often she was groped by kids and adults alike. In costume, she looked like she was 6'6", but was only 5'8" in real life. You couldn't tell the gender of any of the three, 4 in Pluto rotation, and you could barely tell them apart. Story 14. I used to be the Easter Bunny at a function hall, and people were just weird. I'd been threatened by a guy that told me he was going to throw me down the stairs. It's hot, too. Some kids were really happy to get a picture, so it made it all worthwhile. Story 15. Not Disney, but Six Flags over Texas. Was on trash detail. Wandered through Looney Tunes land, laying on the ground in the shade, being handed water and rags as a girl I don't know. Turns out, she'd heat-stroked from being in a mascot suit in Texas in July. Also turns out she's the third to do that today. So my git wanders in and gets asked if I want a promotion to mascot. Damn, yes I do. So I get a crash course in mascot etiquette, do my suit, and stroll out to face the world. So here I am in a black fursuit when it's 125 degrees. I'm out the gate maybe 3 minutes and it all goes wrong. For those of you guessing heat stroke, I wish. I hear the pelting of tiny feet and turn to look. Here's this maybe 6-year-old kid running full tilt, eyes locked onto me. I figure the kid must really love Sylvester and stand, spread eagle, ready for the love and adoration of children. Instead, that little git gets about 4 feet from me and goes to a knee, still full speed. His arm cocks back so far, I think his knuckles scud asphalt, and then he unleashes it. The only thing missing was the flaming bird and the kid actually yelling, "Falcon, punch!" While his cosplay was missing some things, his aim did not. Kid managed to nail me center mass of my right testicle. I screamed in an octave usually reserved for bats and dog whistles and collapsed in a heap. As I proceeded to teach that child every possible combination of every possible curse word, I was dragged back to the employee alleyway I had started from, and they retired the suit for the day. 35 Tenths would not recommend tie for the gold. Story 16. Not an actor, but was at Disneyland in 21 and walked past some stormtroopers. One of them said to me, "Keep that little droid in check," referring to my youngest daughter. So now every time she sees a stormtrooper, she always says, "Dad, remember that time at Disneyland one of them talked to you." Story 17. Reverse of Disney. I was working at Hogwarts Express in Universal Orlando, and a tourist asked me, without a hint of irony, if this was the train to take them to the Disney park. For those who aren't local, Universal and Disney are miles from one another, and for extremely obvious reasons, not connected to one another. This idiot tried to fight me that there was a train you could ride between the two competing parks. Story 18. I was Chippendale in land, and some dad came up with his kids. I was doing my thing and having fun with them. When it came time for pics, the dad comes over to join us, and all is well until after the picture when he asked for a hug, so I gave him one. He squeezed, pulled away, grabbed his kid's hands, smiled, and said, "I didn't know Dale was a girl under all that fur." I played it off at the time, but it made me really uncomfortable that he had actually squeezed hard enough to feel me under my costume. Decided to wear binders while I was in character so that no one else could ever feel my boobs again through the suit. This was back in 2019. Story 19. I was part of the Disney College program, and I have my own stories, but not as a character. My mom, on the other hand, she was a character actor back in the day, 60s or 70s. They were testing a new headpiece for the 7 dwarf costumes in Disneyland, and my mom wore one of them out on a march with Snow White. As a dwarf, your head is inside their hat, their face on their stomach, etc. Being Anaheim, it was really hot that summer day. And as they were going around following Snow White, a little kid saw my mom, Doc. He ran up to give her a hug. As he was hugging Doc, the plastic that made up the face started melting inwards, and the child started screaming, "I killed Doc! I killed Doc!" in hysterics. Character handlers rushed my mom Doc off through one of the secret passages by pirates and got her out of the costume before the plastic could melt onto her. Always thought it was a fun story and curious how much it screwed up that kid. Story 20. I interviewed to work at Disneyland once. My girlfriend at the time got offered a job. I got told, "You're not a good enough person to work for Disney." We went straight from that to meeting my girlfriend's dad for the first time. Great day. Story 21. Former CM, custodial, not character performer, but taking a piss backstage and having a guy walk in and come up next to me in full Jack Sparrow costume and makeup startled me for a second. Also, seeing 2 of a character is always amusing. Story 22. Not quite the correct answer, but still a fairly relevant story to the question. When I was a young and shy boy, we went to Disney World, and at one point, we planned on getting some pictures with Mickey and Minnie Mouse. Before we got any pictures taken with them, Minnie apparently took a liking to me and started pointing to me and blowing kisses at me, to which my young self responded by nervously hiding behind my parents' legs. Seeing this, she then walked over and attempted to hug me, which caused me to sprint away, but she ran after me with her arms still held out for a hug. We didn't go overly far, and on return, my mom managed to get me to give Minnie a hug with some persuasion. Every so often, the time Minnie Mouse fell in love with me and chased me around Disney World comes up at the dinner table again. At the time, I was terrified, but looking back, that is actually a really wholesome memory that I have. Story 23. I was one of the performers for Nick Wilde from Zootopia a few years ago, and if you're not aware, a large number of people in the furry community find him highly attractive. You can just imagine the number of people in that community who flirted with me and/or Judy and whispered some pretty sexual things to us. I think I also had a guy grab Nick's tie like in that flirty way. We had to get him escorted out of the park. The morale of the story is, don't be inappropriate with the characters. We are real people underneath, and there are legitimate consequences for that kind of behavior. Story 24. Not Disney, and I didn't actually work there, but I have a story. When I was 18, my church group spent 3 days at Six Flags, which is a really long time to spend at Six Flags. It's cool, but more like a one-day park. On day 2, I saw an undercover security person detain a kid for shoplifting. On day 3, I saw the same guy just milling about in the area with carnival games. I went over and struck up a conversation with him about his job. At first, he tried to deny that he was undercover, tried to act like he was just a guest, but I knew what I saw. Finally, he tells me that I'm the first person to ever recognize him. He changes clothes 3 or 4 times a day. Hat on, hat off, glasses on, also forth. I was bored of Six Flags by then and talked him into letting me be a part of his disguise. Basically, having me around for a few hours couldn't hurt anything. He said he was currently keeping an eye on one of the workers. She was a carny, and people would pay her $5 to throw baseballs at bottles, or something like that. Sometimes she would put the $5 in her apron, and sometimes she would shove it down on her pants. He was trying to figure out a way to catch her red-handed, as there was a lot of paperwork involved when dealing with an employee. We eventually started hanging out in gift shops and such. He told me that he was almost deaf and had learned to read lips while growing up. So he was lip-reading from across the store trying to catch kids talking about stealing. We didn't make a bust while I was on duty. When it was time for his break, he went in. The employees only area and had changed shirts. I never saw him again. Story 25. My son is neurodivergent, and when he was 4, all he wanted was to meet Elsa and Baymax. Baymax made him sob, and then when he met Elsa, all he wanted to do was talk to her about everything. The handlers tried to move us along understandably as the line was long, but this woman literally took the handler's hand off my son and said, "No, this young man waited to speak to me, and he will stay and speak to me until he decides he is done." I cried. My son hugged her so hard because in that moment, a stranger saw him. Story 26. I was helping Briar Rabbit. A teenage girl grabbed my shirt and lifted it up. The mom did not see it. When the attendant told her what happened, she grabbed her teenage daughter's shirt, lifted it, and exposed her daughter's bra to the entire line, including the 5-year-old boy behind her. Stitch was another friend of mine. People like to hit him because he is indestructible in the movies. They think it's funny. The worst was when a teenage boy punched me in the head in the exact spot where a lip on the costume was, driving it into the base of my skull. It was the only time I ever left a set early. Before the Chicken Little movie came out, they had him greeting at the Art of Animation ride at what was then MGM Studios. A little boy came up and punched me in the stomach because I don't like to eat chicken. That was a new one. One of my most memorable interactions that has stuck with me. A kid with a pin for Give Kids the World, so Wish Kid, left his walker with his mom to walk up to Mickey Mouse. The mom started crying. When we got backstage, I asked the attendant what was going on. She stated that his mom said he had muscular dystrophy and his wish had been to walk up to Mickey Mouse. The mom told her that when they returned home, he was going to start using a wheelchair full-time. Those very well may have been the last unaided steps he ever took. Story 27. Kind of the opposite. But I got felt up by a Pepe Le Pew at Six Flags, I think, when I was 14. I'm guessing he thought he was playing the character, but it was gross. My sister kicked him and called him a pervert. Story 28. It's wild what people think they can just get away with when you're in a fully covered costume. I didn't work at a park, but a long time ago, I used to go out in a Jack-in-the-Box costume, both for fun and for a project, like the mascot for the fast food chain. It was a very accurate costume. The big head helmet part looked almost identical and was very well made. I wore it with a full suit, tie, and all that. I would just walk around and my friend would film from a distance. We were using the footage for a college assignment. I experienced a lot of weird behavior. Guys would smack the helmet as they walked past me. For some reason, a lot of guys thought that was funny or something. They'd be like, "Hey, Jack in the crack," and smack me upside the head. Obviously, it didn't hurt because the head is huge and solid, but it gets sex my head around and was unpleasant. Some smacks were harder than others. It was so weird that their default response was to be abusive. A lot of women wanted to post in sexually suggestive ways for photos. Had a girl walk up, ask for a pic, I said, of course. She turns around, facing away from me, bends over and puts her ass up against my penis. I just stood there, threw up a thumbs up, but she reached back and put my other hand on her waist, and her friend taking the pic encouraged me to pretend to hump her for the pic. Another time, a girl literally squat in front of me, grabbed my hips and put her face down and yelled at her friends to take the pic. I had a GF at the time, and she would not have been happy if she had seen stuff like that. But to echo what others have said here, it's all kind of worth it to an extent. When you see how happy it makes some people. One time I was surrounded by a bunch of kids who thought I was the real deal because they were ecstatic. They ran into the nearby Jack in the Box and grabbed kids' placemats and had me sign them with crayons. It was adorable. Story 29. Never worked for Disney, but I worked with a lot of creepy Disney-obsessed women. More than a few slipped their room keys into cast members' outfits, because having sex with those who were in mouse costume is a fantasy for so many. Story 30. I was timing one day and some massive dude just suddenly picked me up and then pushed me above his head. Timon's costume has a huge tail and feet. I'm surprised the guy managed to even get me up there, but I did not feel safe or even to say, however. Because Timon is not a VIP character, we had like one AC, the cast members who assist and look after the characters. This is Disneyland Paris, to 7 characters. So I was up there for bloody ages with his family taking pics and laughing before the AC saw me. Another time I was grumpy in the parade, and my head frame thing broke, and so Grampy's head was just teetering precariously on my head for the whole parade, and I could hardly see a thing. That was fun. Once I was Winnie and slipped down the icy steps on my arse in front of a queue of people waiting to see me. Luckily, it's kind of in character, and everyone in unison said, "Oh, Winnie." It was a super cold winter, so loads of us had icy mishaps that season. The weirdest thing for sure was when the super rich Saudi prince investor, I don't think they have shares anymore, came over and we had to do basically anything he said. He wanted the whole Duck family in his suite. So literally had Huey, Louie, and Dewey shipped over from Florida as Paris didn't have the costumes. I was Scrooge. We had to go to his suite overlooking Main Street one morning and hand out random certificates to his friends for achievements, including being at Disneyland Paris. Another time when they launched the Marie costume. He threw a massive party in the conference room of one of the hotels and requested a ton of characters. I was Robin Hood, who didn't usually go out at the time due to a dodgy tail. One of the most surreal moments of my life to date was dancing around a room to everybody wants to be a cat, with dozens of totally random Disney characters while fake snow came down from the ceiling and disco lights went crazy. Meanwhile, Saudi Prince and his crew were all at round wedding, like tables just chilling and watching us while we sweated for their entertainment. Good times. Story 31. Not quite Disney, but I worked at a hotel resort chain with a wolf for a mascot. Donning the outfit and greeting people at check-in after smoking on break was always a lot of fun. Once, after a particularly long break, I pulled the suit on, walked into the lobby, and realized we were hosting a convention for little people. The half hour I spent in a 7-foot wolf costume dapping up little people was one of the most surreal experiences I've ever had. Story 32. A good friend is an absolutely gorgeous woman was a princess. For 2 weeks, when amount of dads that would touch her inappropriately was disgusting got to her, she quit. Apparently, this is a common problem for a lot of princesses. Story 33. Long story short, not a former costume actor, but I did interact with one. This happened over 25 years ago. My wife surprised me with a trip to SeaWorld in Ohio. Inside the gate was the costume actor for Shamu. Since my wife is short and I am tall, the actor sat down on the bench with me on one side and my wife on the other to have our photograph taken. Shamu held us in close and my hand naturally fell on their thigh. I'm feeling a roll in the plush fabric and imagining how hot it must feel inside that costume when I realized that it was his junk I was feeling up. Picture is taken with Shamu's git in my hand and we leave the area. My wife falls over laughing as I tell her what happened. She asks if it was a happy ending. Story 34. I worked at a certain pizza place that had a familiar rodent mascot. I don't want to give anything away, so we'll call it C. Cheeses. No, that will give it away. Let's call it Chuck E. Anyways, we all had to take turns in the costume. Worse for me was I got punched right in the stomach by a 10-year-old. It didn't hurt. It just took me by surprise. Then he did it again. One of my coworkers got bit, and that sucked. Story 35. Worked guest services at a new aquarium after high school. I was too tall for the octopus mascot suit, but my best friend wasn't. I did get to hang out with him outside the aquarium as a guard, to make sure nothing crazy like the rest of this thread happened, I guess. It was hot, but he had a fan inside the costume. But it made it harder to hear, so I had to semi-yell at him, "On your left," when kids came from other directions he couldn't see. One time he turned so fast and put his arm up, the heavy wire mesh tentacle hit me right in the balls and put me on my knees. I couldn't breathe and only remember the bricks on the sidewalk looking pink, not red. He didn't know anything had happened, so the tentacle hit me in the head before a nice bystander helped me up and started walking me back to the aquarium entrance. I've never iced my penis before or since, but it helped. Story 36. Never a cast member, but I love telling this story. My first trip to Disneyland, CA, was with my brother and sister-in-law. We'd gotten up early and grabbed some breakfast before driving towards the park. Miracle of miracles. There was only one car ahead of us waiting to park. As we pulled up to the attendant booth, my brother held out his debit card to pay, saying something to the effect of, "Looks like we beat the crowd." The attendant apologetically told us that they only accept cash for parking and directed us just down the street to the closest ATM. As we made the U-turn out of the parking lot, we noticed the queue behind us had already grown to at least 150 cars. We were bummed. We withdrew cash from the ATM and drove back to the park. Of course, by that time, the line for parking was even more massive. As we steeled ourselves for a long wait, we heard a tap on the driver's side window. A man in an orange vest, the tapper, greeted us with a wave and a friendly smile and pointed to a golf cart, which he asked us to follow. Led by the golf cart, we whisked past the crowd of cars, straight to an attendant booth with no line. Waiting for us was the same attendant who'd previously turned us away. "Welcome back, folks," he said with a huge smile. As my brother held out a 20, the attendant said, "I'm so sorry I sent you on an errand. We're not going to charge you for parking today. If you'll follow the cart, they'll help you find your parking space. Free parking, not bad." The golf cart zoomed off with us in tow, all the way through the parking structure and straight in the direction of the entrance. The dude in the golf cart pulled probably 100 yards ahead of us to give himself enough time to hop out and point us to the sweetest, most adult film star parking space, as close as one is able to park to the entrance. In his hand, he had a tag which he asked us to hang from the rearview mirror. "This will be your space for today and tomorrow. You're permitted to come and go as you like. Enjoy your day." It was such an amazing gesture, and it allowed us to conveniently pop out of the park for a bit if we got Disneyed out and wanted to eat at a restaurant in the real world. It must have taken a pretty slick team identify our silver Ford Taurus among all the cars that morning. We still have no earthly idea how they knew how long we were staying. Maybe just a guess? Story 37. Worked Carnation Plaza Gardens in Anaheim during the 90s. All of our Mickeys were short brunettes. A young child followed a Mickey off stage in the alley that ran alongside our kitchen. When Mickey took off her head, the young child had a fit. Also go to ride Space Mountain with the lights on after some repairs, which was pretty cool. Story 38. Not Disney, but I dressed up as a Mad Hatter, not the Disney version, to help my dad's wife promote her landscaping business at an expo. I was alone in the little area she had decorated to look like a garden with a small patio set in the corner and an old mannequin made to look like the March Hare. I was bored, so I started to practice juggling since that seemed like something the Mad Hatter might do. I absolutely stunk at it. I couldn't do more than 2 balls and dropped them about as many times as I caught them. This mom and toddler are wandering the expo and they see me. The mom points me out to the toddler and he is enthralled. He plunked himself down and watched me juggle terribly for a couple minutes like I was an ace circus performer. His mom led him away to the other exhibits, but it made my day. No one else cared about my juggling, though I did end up with my picture in the paper and had a cameo in some soft news piece thing. That kid made my day. Thank you, little boy, for making me feel special. Story 39. I was a face character at WDW from 2012 to 2018. Oh, the stories I could tell. But what really gets me is how many people lie about being performers for Disney, and I don't understand why. Yeah, it seems glamorous from the outside, it's literally just a job. I worked at almost every theme park and dinner show in Central Florida, and Disney was my least paying job. They don't care about your well-being. I know so many girls who struggled with eating disorders due to fear of getting disapproved, and so many instances of assault. They only care that we make our numbers, which is meeting a certain amount of guests. I'll always remember one morning working breakfast at Akershus in the Norway Pavilion, and my captain literally told me to stop squatting down to hug kids because it was taking up too much time. But just know, if you lie about being a Disney performer, 90% of people will believe you because there's always been such an air of mystery behind it, and not a lot of people know how it all actually works. But people who have actually worked there can see through your lies in a second. Story 40. Very much not Disney, but costume tourist attraction. Historical. I have 2. First one, weird and memorable. Second one, really sad. One, place was rumored to and marketed itself on being haunted. Fellow cast member leaves to go unlock all the public areas one morning. Comes back in soon after yelling about there being a ghost in the old jail cell. Obviously, everyone thinks she's joking, but she doesn't calm down and seems to genuinely be panicking. We go as a group. At the top of the stairs, we hear scraping from down in the dark. All assure each other that it's just a small animal that's gotten caught in there. Common occurrence. We make descend the stairs. The dim, on-purse, creepily ambient lights flicker on. Sure as duck, first thing we see is a bearded old man's face staring back at us from within the cell. After having a collective heart attack, we realize that we're really just looking at some dude. Turns out he was a homeless guy that had climbed in trough a garbage chute, found a spare set of keys, and then locked himself into the place where he thought he'd be the least likely to be found to wait out bad weather. We hung out with him until opening, then he left, and we never saw him again. A memory for life, to be sure. 2. We had to leave early because someone found a dead body on the property. Yes, seriously. There was a ring of water surrounding the building in which an intoxicated man had fallen in and drowned the night before. Story 41. My sister was best friends with Mickey, Donald Duck, and Stitch. I am going to ask her this. I've had someone pick me up. I'd be given old clean diapers when a kid was potty trained. Or a binky. I've witnessed someone's died during a parade. I always thought it was weird when people would bring their newborn babies and tried to make a stranger hold your baby while wearing such a constraining outfit. I've been groped when someone was trying to figure out my gender. A cast member hit Stitch on the back of the head when I was heading backstage for no reason at all. Teens like to pull Donald's tail a lot. That's all she could think of. She said she was pretty lucky to not have too many crazy things happen. She got to meet Stevie Wonder, but was sad he didn't meet her. She also has permanent back injuries from wearing the attire and a specific guest pulling her to the ground by her arm. She has some PTSD, FR, where she doesn't like to be touched in certain ways and hates when people try to physically move her, like you can't grab her arm and say, "Come with me," or jump up behind her to hug her because she'll get a panic attack and feel really uncomfortable. That's all from guests not being considerate of the fact that there are real people in those characters. Just wanted to add that to remind everyone to be respectful of the actors and remember they are human and deserve the same boundaries. I even remember that when I was a kid going to Disney, my mom would tell us to always ask, "Can we please get a picture with you?" to the characters. Of course, that's what they're there for, but she was preparing us for real-life people and boundaries. Story 42. Not Disney, but my dad worked at Magic Mountain as the lion tamer for a while in the 70s. Anybody, including little kids, could sit down with an adult, albeit heavily sedated lion, and get a photo. Pretty sad. But one thing my dad remembers most of all is how every morning Major, name of the lion, would take a truly monstrous crap, and every animal in the area would go completely nuts. Completely off topic, but I hope that man writes a book one day. His life was wild as hell, and it followed him into fatherhood. In a good way. Every summer vacation we've been on has been an adventure. I don't know what it is about that man, but the universe just throws him the craziest crap, and he just acts like it's normal, every time. We go to Cuba and get accused of money laundering and sent to a room with no cameras in the airport. I'm freaking out. He's cool as a cucumber. By the end of it, we all end up laughing, and the officer ends up apologizing, giving us some free Wi-Fi credits and some tourist recommendations for photo ops. In Japan, we run into his old buddy Eddie Suzuki, who ended up becoming a famous architect. The guy set us up in style, and we had the best tour guide ever for 2 days. In Hawaii, when I was maybe 8 years old, he makes small talk with a guy named Peter Hernandez, just two Jews who happen to love old school rock and roll, and they end up getting hammered at the bar together. Well, that meant I had to hang out with his son, Bruno Mars. Bruno and I were around the same age, and we had a great time just chilling on the beach and doing dumb kid stuff. We go to LA for a weekend and see Fred Willard at Comedy Club, not performing, just attending. Well, turns out they both lived on the same street as kids in Shaker Heights. Fred and his wife hang out with us at the same table, and they just kind of shoot the crap. Story 43. Not super related to the original question, but my buddy was a cashier at Fiesta, Texas, in college. Right around the end of the summer, he got called in and fired for giving everyone the 5% season pass discount. They told him he gave away around $25K in discounts. He was banned from Fiesta, Texas for 2 years. Peak. If you're reading this, you did the Lord's work that summer. Story 44. Not a Disney park, but I used to be a handler that walked around the stadium with a Major League Baseball mascot. I'll just come out and say it. It was the Oriole bird. I'd say sports mascots are in an even more of a precarious situation for the actors. Sports fans can be drunk. They aren't always at the game with their kids, and they can be unruly. I saw that poor Oriole bird get punched, have beer dumped in his mouth, shoved downstairs, put in a headlock, challenged to fights, all sorts of wild stuff. But the guy who played the bird didn't take a lot of crap. He was a bit like one of those palace guards in London. It might take him a while to fight back, but you didn't want to be on the other end of it when he did. As a handler, part of our job was to prevent him from snapping and fighting back too hard. Like they used to joke that Mike Tyson had bodyguards. Not for him, but for the other people. So basically, we were there to stop a 6-foot mascot from going Hulk mode on drunk, unruly sports fans. Story 45. I wasn't a character, but character adjacent. A guest came up to Elsa when she was brand new, wearing a shirt with his face screen printed on it. In the picture, he was wearing a crown. He refused to say anything to Anna and Elsa, so Elsa tried striking up a conversation. I like your shirt. Are you a king? I'm a queen. He looks at her and blares, $59.99, peasant. Security later followed the guy and found him with a handle of vodka in the bathroom. Story 46. Not a cast member, but I was visiting Disney with my family and my 4-year-old daughter honked Pluto's nose. I immediately and calmly asked her to stop, and I apologized to Pluto because I felt like that was crossing a line. This thread made me feel a little bit better about the nose honk. Story 47. Not Disney, but there was a Tampa Bay Lightning fan who tried to beat up the Florida Panthers mascot. So what happened was late in the third period, 5 minutes left in the game, the Panthers were winning 7-1, and a likely drunk Tampa Bay Lightning fan was upset, saw their mascot, which is a rat, weird piece of Panthers lore, and he tried to put his jersey on him or something. I'm sure the guy in the mascot provoked him or something. So then, after the guy tried to put it on him, it wouldn't fit obviously, the mascot took it from the guy and tossed it down the arena. Then the fan takes the mascot's jersey and covers his face and pins him onto a railing and putting him in a headlock. No one tried to stop him because I'm not sure if security was supposed to help or his handlers aren't allowed to intervene or not. But the drunk fan got his jersey and sat back down in his seat. Some say it was fake and staged for the game, but it wouldn't happen during play down 6 goals with 5 minutes left, I feel. They said an investigation would happen, but I haven't heard a thing about it since. Story 48. Went to college with a young lady who worked summers at Disney World as a character actor. She wouldn't tell any stories, but she did say that for the last 3 summers, she had spent all day, every day, open to close at World Disney. She was either working in costume or wandering the park. In the Florida heat, talk about overload. Story 49. Worked at a certain famous chocolate park. The suit was way too big on me. The safety pin holding the pants up popped. Pants fell down. I tripped. My big shoe came flying off and hit a kid. I was immediately fired, even though it was not my fault. Story 50. I worked as a Smurf at Great America in the 80s. I was only 5 feet tall and maybe 100 pounds. I got beat up by 5 teenagers because beating up a Smurf is fun. I had a concussion and separated ribs. Story 51. I didn't work at Disney, but as a teenager, I volunteered at our local zoo. We happened to have some character costumes that we would wear at events to be fun for the kids. The assortment of costumes was odd. We had Matilda, the stinky cheese man, who even is this, a zebra, the zoo mascot, and Winnie the Pooh. My teenage volunteer friends and I always wanted to be the ones to wear the costumes. And of course they let us because they were hot as Hades inside there, especially during the summer. The craziest experience to me was how often people would try to hand me their babies when I was wearing Winnie the Pooh. The costume had these little short arms that you could only sort of wave back and forth and definitely couldn't hold anything. Yet people would repeatedly try to pass you their infant. We couldn't talk while inside, so from the outside you just see Pooh shaking his head and waving them off. I was terrified I was going to drop a baby as Pooh. Story 52. I wore a gorilla costume for a charity event once as it was a jungle theme. I was roaming around in my best gorilla mannerisms. One lady was extremely fascinated with me and grabbed my head to stick her tongue through the mouth hole as far as she could. I was basically in a pool of sweat in there. I was very committed to the role, and those costumes are hot. As she pulled away, you could see the string of saliva as we separated. Her husband was smirking behind her, and she just said, "It must be hot in there." Story 53. I played Cinderella's stepsisters. The number of adults that wanted me to kiss their kids when they were so against or scared is messed up. Story 54. Had a grown man with Down syndrome unzip my dress. His family didn't try to stop him until after he had gotten a hold of the zipper of the bodice. I'm sure it looked like a weird dance to anyone watching, but it was terrifying for me. Story 55. I worked Splash Mountain while in college in the 90s. A kid reached over and took off my cowboy hat, revealing my long, ponytailed hair. As a dude, that wasn't allowed. Word got around that I had long hair and was a rebel. This led to Belle from the Disney parade asking me out on a date. Story 56. I work for a company that does mostly Disney characters for kids' birthdays and other events that people hire us for, and people are insane. During one of my most recent previous events, where I was Elsa for a very large local company employee party, I had a woman approach me, saying I should model, then following it up with offering me a job to work with her at a local strip club. I've had a lot of other wild things happen to me, everything from harassment while I was a minor playing Sarah Sanderson, to kids trying to have one-on-one therapy about their deceased family with Princess Aurora. All that to say, I think Elsa being offered a job as a stripper is by far my funniest story yet. Story 57. All these comments about women getting assaulted makes me hope that the actress that played Jasmine didn't think 10-year-old me was being weird putting my arm around her belly. Story 58. Not Disney, but Legoland. Had a family that had like 10 or so kids come up for a picture while I was Benny the Spaceman. They constantly pulled on my arms, hands, and jetpack while I just silently looked at my character escort. Story 59. Not Disney, but I've been an Easter bunny before. The kids were loving it, but I guess the head hadn't been cleaned out in a while, because a little into my first time doing it, a brown recluse spider started to crawl down into the head. I was surrounded by kids and tried to keep my cool until they left. Then I ran to the back and screamed as I threw the head. Story 60. We went to Disneyland 30 years ago. We went with my grandparents and my mom. We were having the Disney breakfast and Aladdin was there. My grandfather was trying to chat with Aladdin and asked how he liked the new hockey team. Just for the record, Anaheim had just gotten the team. Anyways, Aladdin, without skipping a beat, says to my grandfather that he's not sure as there's no ice in Agrabah. It was really the funniest moment, and my grandfather's face was priceless. Story 61. My cousin's buddy played Tigger at Disney Anaheim like 15 years ago. They wouldn't let characters take costumes off premises and guaranteed they'd wash them daily. They didn't wash the costume, and he got scabies from it, presumably from another actor who also used the suit. It turned out they hadn't washed the suit in like 3 months. He sued Disney, threatened to go to the media, and they paid the dude like $400,000 to go away and be quiet. Story 62. I worked at Chuck E. Cheese. When I was in the costume on a busy day, we could do the happy birthday dance for all the parties at once. I was in the middle of the song when a dad came up on stage in front of about 250 people and threatened to kick my ass because I was scarring his kid. Story 63. Not Disney, but I used to be the Red Robin. Way more old men smacked the Robin in the head on their way out of the restaurant than you might guess. Costumes smelled like feet, grease, and onions. I'll never forget it. But damn it, it paid $1 more than hosting. Story 64. I was a musician, and my fav was seeing Snow White smoking a cigarette on the loading dock wearing a Cleveland Streamers t-shirt. Close second was Goofy with his head off by the castle smoking a W-dye. Story 65. The stormtroopers tried to get my dad once at Hollywood Studios. Pre-Galaxy's Edge, and I know a grown man going, "No, nope, not today," made them laugh, because I could hear them stifling laughter in their suits. Story 66. I knew a girl in high school who was obsessed with Peter Pan. Right out of school, she moved cross-country and got a job at Disney, and started dating the actor who played Peter Pan. Story 67. I've heard stories of visitors feeling so connected to Disney mascots that they tell them about their depression and really deep personal secrets. It kind of sounds terrifying. Story 68. I was groped by Minnie Mouse as I stood between Minnie and Mickey and my girlfriend snapped a photo. Her hands were all over my ass, and I was like, "Take the picture," through a forced smile. I told her what happened as we were walking away, and she said, sometimes guys wear the mini costume. I said, gee, thanks for the visual. Story 69. I had an ex that worked at Space Mountain, just a regular worker on the ride that interacts with the public. She told that literally every day a guy would hit on her, often with their family right there.